is entered muted. We are going to have a question Q&A section later where you can, I will be answering questions. When we do that, just please chat them to me. There is a chat. You can message just to everyone or just to me. Okay, great. We have just a couple more folks trying to join. All right, great. I'm going to wait until just the end of the 6:30 minute to get started on the presentation. Thank you everybody for joining me. Looks like we've got people from all across the state. Somebody asked, will this webinar be available for viewing later? Yes. All right, Gaithersburg represented, we know that. Okay, great. I am going to get started on our first slideshow. And first I'll review the agenda. So just a reminder, if you do have questions during the slideshow, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I will review them and there we'll have about 10 minutes for questions after the first slideshow. And then Avery from Interfaith Power and Light will walk us through some lobby skills. And then we'll jump into the rest of the training. But there will be a section for Q&A and I'll try to leave some space at the end as well. All right, and if you're joining by phone, some of what I'm saying, a lot of it will make sense, but if you can join by a computer, that is definitely preferred. Great, okay. All right. So first we're going to talk about the Clean Energy Jobs and Pipeline and Water Protection Act. Then I will stop for some questions. Then, like I said, we'll jump into a slideshow reviewing lobby skills. Then we will we'll walk through how to prepare for a meeting. Our meeting will start with our pretend legislator at 7:30. Our visit will be about 10 minutes, but I've got so hopefully we'll have some time. But if we need a little bit of more extra time for questions, we will spend some time on that. Okay, great. So first we're going to cover the Clean Energy Jobs Act, then the Pipeline and Water Protection Act, and then what you can do right now. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act, oh, it's muted. There we go. Okay, the Clean Energy Jobs Act this year is Senate Bill 516 and House Bill 1158. We have support from across the state for this bill. We have endorsements from over 660 organizations, including labor, businesses, and faith communities. It is endorsed by the wind and solar industry, and we have coalition support from Interfaith Power and Light, who's joined us tonight, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, Maryland Environmental Health Network, CCAN, and we're also joined by Sierra Club. All right, and I'm just gonna, there we go. Okay. Sorry, I hope you can't see that. Okay. So we also saw some great polling on the first day of session. Gonzalez polling showing that 64% of Marylanders believe Hogan should support the Clean Energy Jobs Act. We've seen resolutions from several different municipalities across the state. And right now we have 73 House co-sponsors and 27 Senate co-sponsors, leaving us in giving us a majority in both houses. So now I'm going to talk about what the bill actually does. The first, and I think the thing that is most known for, is increasing the renewable portfolio standard to 50% by 2030 and creating a plan for 100% by 2040. And you might be wondering, what is the renewable portfolio standard? It is the mandate by the state for how much or what percentage of our energy portfolio should come from renewable sources. We most recently pushed in 2016 to bring the current RPS law to 25% by 2020. That was actually vetoed by Governor Hogan, and we had to override that veto in 2017. So the bill actually passed in 2017, even though it said 2016. But right now, what that means is that we don't have anything on the books after 2020. And the way the legislature works, when the year that you pass a bill is not necessarily the year that the bill goes into effect. For normal legislation, a bill will go into effect in the next calendar year. So if we want to increase our reliance on renewables without a gap, this is the last year to pass something. And there's other reasons that we need to act now. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the largest convention of experts ever on a single topic in history, renewable investment needs to be between 48 and 60% by 2030. And if we stay at 25%, we would overshoot the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold needed to keep our climate stable. These climate findings were confirmed again this year by a huge federal report released on Black Friday that showed that the climate change is already undermining the US economy. We know that we're experiencing a lot of flooding across the country, and it is already having an effect. We also know that Maryland is one of the most vulnerable states to climate change. We have over 3,000 miles of coastline, and according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, we are going to see 22 communities that are going to face chronic flooding as a result of climate change. So we need to do something about this right now. And it looks like we have a couple more people waiting. I'm just going to admit them. Great. There are other impacts of dirty energy as well. We know that 85% of Marylanders live in areas that fail to meet the EPA's national clean air standards. We have the dubious distinction of being the worst in the eastern US for ground level ozone pollution. And according to the National Academy of Sciences, polluting energy sources have cost Marylanders an average of $73 a month. And the truth is that not everyone is hit by environmental issues evenly. People of color and individuals facing poverty are hit a lot harder. It's a lot harder to recover from extreme weather. We know that still to this day, some communities are recovering from Katrina. That was years and years ago. We also know that communities of color breathe 40% dirtier air than their white counterparts. And white folks experiencing poverty breathe 27% dirtier air than their wealthier counterparts. So we know that this issue is also not fair. So what's our solution? It is to increase the renewable portfolio standard to 50% first by 2030, explore a pathway to 100% through a study. In our bill, it requires a study due in 2023 on how we can equitably and realistically reach 100% by 2040. And we want to execute that plan to be at 100% by 2040. And this is a projection. This is a model created by the solar industry based on data from what applications we have for renewable energy coming online to our grid, of what will grow under the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So as we can see from this graph, most of our RPS by 2030 would be from wind and solar, about 94%. But that does leave some other sources in there that are less than clean. So we are taking action in our campaign to remove one of them, which is trash incineration. I have a couple more people in the waiting room. I'll admit them. Great. Okay, so the next part of our campaign is about ending incentives for trash incineration. We know that burning trash is not clean energy. To make the same amount of energy as a coal power plant, the dirtiest type of fossil fuel, trash incinerators release 2.5 times as much carbon dioxide, as well as a host of other chemicals that are really, really bad to be breathing. I know personally, I'm from Baltimore City, and I actually grew up in Fells Point, which is right in the area near the incinerator. I know that both my mother and I have asthma, and it's a burden on our city, and it is definitely a justice issue as well. So we know that burning trash should not be subsidized as a clean energy source. So right now, we saw a couple changes to the bill, but in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, the Senate bill removes incentives for trash incineration as the bill had originally been worked out by our coalition. Unfortunately, right now, the House bill does not remove those incentives, but what we want to see is to have that added back in, either through an amendment or during conference committee if the Senate bill goes through. There's other legislation that we support as well as part of a package deal with our House bill that Senator Huff and Delegate Mosby have introduced that would redefine trash incineration out of the renewable portfolio. That's Senate Bill 548 and House Bill 961. We really support these as well. What this means is that right now the incineration industry is having to fight 3 different bills, right? So 2 in the, one on the House and 1 in the Senate just standalone, and then our Senate bill as well, removing trash incineration. So we no matter how it happens, we want to see burning trash removed we want to take out the trash, remove it as a clean energy source. The next part of the bill that I'm going to talk about is why we call it the Clean Energy Jobs Act. It creates those jobs by increasing demand for wind and solar. And right now, the solar industry is in crisis in Maryland. We are one of the only states in the Mid-Atlantic to lose solar jobs. We saw released information today that Maryland has lost 800 solar jobs in the last year. We know this was exacerbated, of course, by the Trump tariffs. And what we're seeing is that installers are laying off employees or moving them to other states where the demand is higher. That's because the price for solar credits just crashed. The demand just did not exist in our state. So by increasing the demand for solar, we would see a huge influx of solar jobs. And in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, there's a specific solar carve out of 14.5%. Based on the modeling, we would actually overshoot that. That's a floor, not a ceiling. We would see more than 14.5% coming from solar. But that carve out alone would create 19,300 jobs in the solar industry. It's been supported, this increase has been supported by the solar industry as the best way to support and create solar jobs and fix the solar industry crisis. We also know that about 80% of those jobs would be installation jobs. They pay at an average of 26 per hour. So we know that those would be good jobs as well that could really change somebody's life. Also included in our bill is a 1.2 gigawatt carve out for solar, which would create an additional 5,300 jobs and help us to meet our big energy demands, which would support other efforts to increase wind in our state as well. And so we really want to make sure that those jobs stay in state. The Clean Energy Jobs Act uplifts workers by including local hiring and Buy America provisions that we worked really closely with our labor stakeholders to develop. And that comes in the form of a clean energy workforce account, which looks like $7 million in apprenticeships in the renewable energy. It's a $7 million tax credit to organizations that would provide apprenticeships that result in jobs. That also includes $1 million for programs in our high schools. And a really important part of this conversation is making sure that as we grow our reliance on renewable energy, we do not also grow our inequality. That's why the Clean Energy Jobs Act takes steps by providing grants to small, veteran, people of color, and women-owned businesses entering the clean energy economy. Right now, nationally, African Americans represent only 7.4% of the solar workforce. In Maryland, our number is slightly better at around 9%, but definitely does not reflect our population. And women only 27%. We would boost those numbers by providing a $17.5 million grant to small being businesses with less than 50 employees, veteran-owned, people of color, and women-owned businesses entering the clean energy economy. So the big question that a lot of legislators will certainly have on their mind at this point is, how much will it cost? Well, I'm really happy to say that we received a really favorable fiscal note for the bill last year. The fiscal note is not out yet for this year, but there's nothing in the bill that would change it. And we saw that it would be less than $2 per month per ratepayer. And that comes from the Department of Legislative Services. So just quick aside here, every bill that goes through the legislature receives a fiscal note. It's a supplementary document that legislators look at to see what the budget impacts of a bill will be. Your legislators do not make decisions about bills without really seeing that fiscal note. So having a favorable fiscal note is so important. According to the Department of Legislative Services, so the legislature itself, the Clean Energy Jobs Act would create a $1.45 to $1.85 impact per ratepayer per month, so for less than a cup of coffee. But what's not included in that price tag would be the costs avoided by preventing environmental disaster and health crisis. The EPA estimated an 8 to 22 billion annual benefit from just a 40% RPS in Maryland. And it does not include the benefits of stimulating our economy. All of those jobs would result in a $340 million direct wage benefit. And with that factored in, we would actually be seeing about a $5 per month benefit per ratepayer. So in summary, the Clean Energy Jobs Act is supported across the state and by legislators. It has a pathway to 100% green energy. It removes trash incineration from the RPS on the Senate side, and we're campaigning to make sure that that is included no matter what. It equitably invests in our workforce and creates 20,000 Maryland jobs, and all of that, and it is fiscally sound. All right. So I'm going to move now on to the Pipeline and Water Protection Act. Please make sure that if you have any questions that you are chatting them right to me as they come up for you, and we will get to those. So I'm going to go ahead with this, and then I will pause. Oops, sorry. Okay. Okay, so the Pipeline and Water Protection Act is new this year. We did not try to. This is the first year that we're pushing it through, and we are hoping to get it through in 1 year. We are introducing it as emergency legislation for reasons that I will get into later. That does require a higher voting threshold, but we're really hopeful that we can get it through this year. We have a big coalition around this bill. We're joined by Interfaith Power and Light, Food and Water Watch, the NAACP, Sierra Club is working on this really closely with us. So we have a big coalition around this bill and believe that we can do it in one, so to speak. So we are experiencing momentum across the state around preventing pipelines. We saw, a lot of you might know that we did see the final easement needed for the Potomac pipeline denied by the Hogan administration. So we know that there is a big grassroots movement, and we've seen across the state in different fights that there is a desire to protect our communities from pipelines. And I will go into a little bit more about that fight later in my slideshow. So, but first I'm just going to outline what the Pipeline and Water Protection Act would actually do. First and most notably, it would mandate that the Maryland Department of Environment issue a water quality certificate for every pipeline every interstate pipeline. It would also outline what that study must include, like climate impacts and consideration of drinking water sources nearby. And critically, it would provide a public comment period. As soon as an application for a pipeline is approved by MDE, it would be posted to their website, so we would know that a pipeline has been applied for. And it would also provide a period where, if the pipeline was approved by MDE, that they would have to issue a draft approval, and that there would be a public comment period in district in the counties where the pipeline would be going through. So really, really, really critically adds transparency to the pipeline process, which as a lot of you who've bought pipelines know, sometimes folks don't know that there's a pipeline coming until it's being built in their backyard. So this is really, really critical for giving communities a chance to organize. So I'm going to speak a little bit as to why we are pursuing this year. So the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission is the agency responsible for regulating interstate pipelines. Over the last 30 years, they have denied exactly 2 of 500 proposed pipelines. So we know that typically when it comes to interstate pipelines, our state is preempted by FERC. They have authority over this. And our only vehicle really is the Clean Water Act, back in the 70s, enacted to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. And under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, it expressly states that no license or permit will be granted to a pipeline if a water quality certificate has been denied by the state. So this strategy was used, it has great precedent, and that was the main strategy that we pursued in the Potomac pipeline fight. The precedent that we were modeling after was a pipeline fight in New York State. From the Constitution was going to build a pipeline under the Hudson. And in that fight, we saw a huge grassroots movement demanding that Governor Cuomo and the New York Department of Environment conduct that 401 study and deny it after it's been conducted. And that worked. They pushed, and the permit was denied, and that decision was actually challenged in court and was upheld. So we know that it has really, really strong legal precedent. We tried a similar strategy in Maryland. We had a similar robust, amazing grassroots movement demanding that Governor Hogan and the Maryland Department of Environment conduct a 401 review and deny the pipeline on that basis. But unfortunately, what we saw was that MDE found a loophole. It turns out that the state has 1 year from the time that an application is submitted to the end of that 1 year period to conduct that study. And if that period is waited out, the state waives its right to conduct that study. So we saw that happen, and it resulted in FERC approving the Potomac pipeline back in July. Now, thankfully, as I mentioned before, we saw that the pipeline, the final easement needed for the pipeline from the Board of Public Works was denied. That was a unexpected turn of events. And unfortunately, it leaves us open to legal challenges. There isn't really a precedent for it. And it relies on a political process that does not create a reliable and consistent standard for pipelines coming through in this way. So we know that right now we're open to challenges on the Potomac pipeline. and we don't want to be in that position in the future. And we are enacting this as emergency legislation, and what the difference is there is that a higher threshold is needed to pass the legislation. It requires a 3/5 vote of the legislature and to enact emergency legislation. But that means that it goes, rather than going into effect in the following calendar year, it would go into effect right away. And that's really important because right now we are facing a 193-mile fracked gas pipeline on the Eastern Shore, and the Clean Water Act under Section 401 is one of our only vehicles to deny this project. Right now, we're still in a position where MDE could waive its authority to do a full water quality review. And just another note, and for those legislators to understand the stakes that we're up against, since 2010, so in less than a decade, 474 people have been injured, 100 people have been killed, and 3.5 billion in damages have occurred from pipelines in the US. So we know that this is a protection that we need to make sure that we are not left vulnerable to unreviewed pipelines. Okay, so how can you help? You can join us for our lobby night next Monday. It says arrive by 5 p.m. I would actually arrive by 4:30. That's when our registration will be open. You can call and write to your legislators to express your support, and you can contact party leadership and House leadership on these issues. The bills will be going to the Economic Matters Committee, the Environment and Transportation Committee, in both of those in the House, and then Finance and EHE in the Senate. So I'm going to stop my slideshow now and answer some questions. Okay, great. Okay, so first question. So when we talk to our delegate, should we advocate passing the bill as is, just so long as it passes, change it later, or amending it to remove incinerations for trash incineration? And so that, I would say that you should advocate for ending incentives to trash incineration. That is been a huge part of this campaign. It's still present in the Senate version. I would really push that no matter what happens, that we end incentives for trash incineration this year. That could come in the form of amending the Clean Energy Jobs Act and coming to conference committee between the Senate and House side and working out that difference and making sure that the RPS, the removal of incineration is in that. But it could also look like, whatever makes most sense strategically by towards the later in session when we know the status of those other incineration bills. But no matter what, we want to make sure that incineration is ended this year. Okay. The number of jobs, that number was arrived at by the solar industry from their modeling. All right. Yes, we can I can give copies of these slides. I don't know about other legislation specifically related to wind, but that is definitely a question for our coalition that I could get an answer to if you email me. All right. Okay. How does one become injured or killed by a pipeline? Well, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. Pipelines can leak. They're carrying dangerous fuel inside of them. They can, oh my goodness, if the ground underneath the pipeline has gone through is not ideal geology, like I know the Potomac pipeline was going to go through karst terrain. It can create sinkholes. There are a lot of different aspects to be aware of. If your delegates or senators support, what do we do on Monday and in general? I would say, you know, we need to make sure that they're keeping it as a priority. There's a lot of really exciting bills going through the legislature this session, to making sure that it's still on their mind, that they advocate for it at any available opportunity. You can move them from, which we'll get into a little later, if you think somebody's already supportive, getting them to champion the bill for you. Okay. Yeah, and so last question that I'm going to take. I saw that the Baltimore Clean Air Act is advancing. Does Baltimore's own action to clamp down on dirty trash provide another talking point? Worried about saving jobs? Absolutely, I would bring that up. That the areas that are host to the incinerators have passed resolutions, both in Montgomery County and Baltimore City, saying that they want to end these incentives, and that we are seeing Baltimore City take motions to end these incentives. Okay, I am going to, that's the last question that I will take for now. I'm going to go revisit these. If we should have time at the end of our presentation. So now I'm going to hand it over to Avery from Interfaith Power and Light. Many of you probably know him. And I've got that started, but I don't have my screen shared. So let me do that. Okay. All right. And take it away, Avery.
Great. Hey, everyone. I'll turn this camera up a little bit. We're good. Hi, like Emily said, thanks, Emily. I'm Avery Davis Lamb with Interfaith Power and Light, and our mission is to build a religious response to climate change. So we work with congregations of all faiths throughout the DC, Maryland, Virginia region, talking about climate change, education, doing greening, and then working with you on advocacy, like we will be doing next week. So I'm going to go through a little bit of a lobby training with you. So this will just be a brief overview. We're going to be talking about what is lobbying, why we lobby, how to lobby. We're going to be doing a great role play demonstration where I will become Speaker Mike Bush. It'll be really exciting. And then at the end, we'll have a chance to discuss and debrief and talk about what went well and what didn't go well, so we can feel prepared for our lobby meetings on Monday. So to start out with, just to define what is lobbying. So the act of lobbying is working to persuade an elected official on a certain piece of legislation. So this includes two distinct pieces. The first is direct persuasion, which is what we're doing Monday, going into a meeting, asking them face-to-face to support these two pieces of legislation. And the second reason that we lobby is for information gathering, so that we can learn from them how they feel about this legislation, what messages move them, and we can take this back to our grassroots and field work and help inform how we're building a movement in order to move our legislators. So what we're doing on Monday is in-person lobbying, or direct lobbying. There's also grassroots lobbying, which is when it's not a paid lobbyist showing up, you know, like Big Oil or whoever, you know, that's bad lobbying. But grassroots lobbying is when people like you and I go to Annapolis, meet with our officials, and ask them as citizens, as Marylanders, we want you to support this bill. So just to clarify, you do not need to register as a lobbyist or pay anything or be paid because you're a citizen. You can go in any time to lobby your officials. Now, why do we lobby? What's the point of showing up and asking our elected officials to support legislation? Well, lobbying has a deep history of being important for social movements in our country. All of the social progress and environmental progress that we've made in our state and our country's history has included a lobbying piece where we meet our legislators, we develop relationships with them, and we say to them face to face that we want you to support legislation that is going to improve our health and the environmental health. There's also an interplay here of lobbying and field work, and you know, this is why it's so important that we have folks from throughout the state coming to Annapolis to lobby on Monday. It's because what happens in Annapolis isn't isolated. That legislators care a lot about what is happening back home. So that's why we do events in churches and congregations across the state. That's why we love it when churches go solar. Any of that is because what happens in your district makes a difference for what happens in that lobby meeting as well. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to move legislators up a notch on this tier of support. So, you know, I'm under no expectation that going into and talking to a senator who is completely opposed to any clean energy, that's not, one lobby meeting is not going to move them from being completely opposed to totally in love. And if you're able to do that, please come and find me and tell me how you did it, because I want to learn. But in general, what we want to do is we want to move anyone who's opposed to being neutral, anyone who's neutral to supporting, and anyone who's supporting but apathetic to supporting and championing. Now, we also want to ensure that these lobby meetings are successful. Just showing up isn't enough. We want to make sure that we're having an impact on the people that we're meeting with. So to start out with, I'm just going to go through a few things that makes a successful lobbyist. So this is what you want to epitomize when you go into these lobby meetings. And the first thing is being personable, patient, and sharp. And that includes admitting uncertainty. We don't have all the answers. We're just citizens, but we can always find the answers afterwards. And so if you don't know something, just say, I don't know that right now, but I can easily find that answer and send it to you. And that shows vulnerability and humility. And it also shows that you're just not making things up on the spot, which is never good. And like I said before, these are really important for information gathering. So a successful lobbyist is always gathering information, listening to keywords, seeing what resonates with the legislator, taking notes, and then bringing that back to folks like me and Emily so that when we set up more of these meetings, we can ensure that whatever was resonating with that senator or representative, we can make sure that that happens in the next meeting and that happens in our field work as well. Successful lobbyists are also good at prioritizing. We're limited in time with some of these meetings. You know, they could be as short as 10 or 15 minutes because our lawmakers' schedules are very, very busy. So you want to prioritize, what do I need to communicate? What is going to be effective? You also need to be really ready and willing to talk to anybody at any time. So it's not just set up lobby meetings that can be effective for lobbying, but it's maybe if you see Speaker Bush in the hallway and you have 15 seconds to give him your pitch about why he should pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act, you need to be ready for that whenever you can. And like I said before, you need to prepare that 20-second elevator pitch. So know in your mind what you're going to say and how you're going to say it succinctly. In our role playing later, we'll talk through timing, but when you start a meeting, you always want to check how long do I have? And then throughout the meeting, ensure that you're keeping track of time so that you don't get carried away. And then you want to constantly probe with the legislator and keep digging in as to why they either do support or don't support. And if they don't support, you don't want to just take no for an answer. You want to find out why, and you want to find out what might move them from a no to a maybe or a maybe to a yes. So those are some things about what makes a successful lobbyist. So now we're going to dig into what makes a successful lobby visit. So the first thing is you want to make sure you know your specific goal ahead of time. The second thing is you want to know your target so that way you can tailor your pitch. So make sure you read up on your legislators before the meetings. Know what committees they serve on. Know if they're part of a church or a congregation in their district. Know where they're from, and make sure you you know what their district is like, so that you can have messages that are tailored to resonate with what they want to hear. Now, a lobby visit also needs to have the right people in the meeting. A senator may not really care if there are 4 people in a meeting if none of them are from her district. So you want to make sure that the right people, preferably people who are from her district, are there in the meeting, and that they can speak to the topic that we're meeting about. And that leads me to having compelling facts and stories. Stories are what move people. You want to make sure that when you're in a meeting, you can tell a story that both tells why you care about this and why the person you're meeting with cares about this. Ideally, these stories should also be supported by facts that tell the holistic reason of why we're here to talk about the Clean Energy Jobs Act. I'm going to let a couple more people into the waiting room here in just a second. Okay. Next up is building a relationship. So much of lobbying is about relationships because it's person-to-person connection that moves people. So don't just see this as a transactional meeting where you're trying to strategize and get the legislator to move and this one key piece is going to get them. No, you want to build out a relationship here. Speak person to person so that you can follow up in a meaningful way. And this is the most important thing here that makes a successful lobby visit, is to have a strong ask. So know going into that meeting what you're going to ask of that legislator. Now we'll talk about that a little more when we get into the role playing, and we'll help you come up with that ask, but that's what these are for. And you want to have that strong ask and deliver it in a way that is clear and concise. A successful lobby visit, you should also have a follow-up plan. So know who's going to send the follow-up email afterwards, who's going to give a follow-up call. You want to say thank you. And if they ask for any information or any details that you weren't able to provide in that meeting, be sure to provide those in the follow-up. And always have a good leave behind, a piece of paper that you can leave with them so that they can go back and understand what the meeting was about. And we will share that with you, and we'll have that available for you on Monday. So some pitfalls of a lobby visit that you want to avoid. First is you want to avoid not knowing much about your target. So it would be pretty embarrassing to go into that room and to not understand what district the legislator is from, what committees they're on. Some of these important details, you need to make sure that you understand those important details so that you can make a real connection with them. Not doing a time check. The worst case scenario is that you're 15 minutes into the meeting, you haven't made your ask yet, but the legislator has to leave. You want to avoid that at all costs, so make sure you're staying on time. As I said before, stories are really what moves people, so avoid giving too many facts or statistics. Those can be available on the leave behind, and they can find those later, but in the meeting, when it's human to human, make sure you prioritize the stories. And that's another pitfall, is not having a personal story or compelling facts. That's what these meetings are about, is that human-human connection. So make sure you have that personal story. You also want to avoid talking too much, and you don't want to ask too many questions of the legislator. Their time is limited, and there are probably other people in the meeting who also need to say their 2 cents. So just make sure you're not oversharing or talking too much. Another pitfall is not making a strong ask. So this is your one chance to meet with the legislator or their staff. You want to make sure you get that ask precise and perfect, and you deliver it with strength. Another pitfall is not bringing any compelling materials. So we'll provide materials for you on Monday, but in general, be sure to have good compelling materials that are going to provide the information that they need. And finally, not having a follow-up plan. So when you're in your lobby groups, make sure that you assign who's going to follow up, what are they going to follow up with, and then afterwards, directly after the meeting, do a quick debrief with your group so that everyone understands, okay, this is who's following up, these are the things that we need to send them. Okay, so we're gonna, I'm gonna invite my friends to come up here, and we're gonna be doing a role play activity, and I'll have Emily lead us in this.
All right, great. So let's get settled around the room here. So for this part of the training, I'm actually first going to walk you through a document that I'm actually going to be sharing in the chat right now. It should be public, so I'm going to share it with you. And that's what we will be using, but I will also make sure that this goes along in the follow-up email to this event, so you will have it. But this is the document that we're going to be reviewing. And so let me see. Can we see everybody? Oh, I can't quite see. Scooch in there. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be going through this document. We'll spend about 15 minutes on it, but we will make sure that we are on time to our lobby meeting at 7:30. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we know what our core messages are about why the legislator should support this piece of legislation. And we've actually talked about this before, but so for our top 3 points for the Clean Energy Jobs Act was first, of course, mentioning the big jobs piece, that we really 20,000 Maryland jobs is something that we want to make sure that they hear that number. Like as Avery said before, we're going to be pretend meeting with Mike Bush. So we want to keep these like big pieces about how it will help all Marylanders when he is somebody who sort of in a lot of ways represents all Marylanders is an important piece. We also want to talk about the incineration piece, make sure that that gets in. So that's a really important piece of our campaign and has a little bit of nuance to it. And I'm going to be mentioning that. I'm also, like I said, from Baltimore. It's a very personal issue to me, so I think it's a good thing for me to bring up. And we also wanted to reiterate that the Clean Energy Jobs Act is needed right now. Talking a little bit about the IPCC report and how we know that climate change is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and that Maryland is particularly vulnerable to climate issues. For the pipeline bill, Jason's going to be talking about that, and we're going to emphasize the fact that the Maryland Department of Environment has waived their right to conduct a 401 study in the past. That's what we saw in the 401 or with the Potomac pipeline. So mentioning that, mentioning that the risks from pipelines are considerable, and we want to make sure that there's no loophole allowing a pipeline to be built without a safety study. And then really just emphasizing the safety aspects of the bill and what's at stake when it comes to pipelines. So then you also want to think about what objections that you might want to anticipate from our legislators. So Avery and we talked about it before, and he has experience that he knows that one thing that we've sort of been hearing from Mike Bush's office is, oh, we'll do something on RPS, but maybe just not right now, not really understanding that urgency piece. So we want to make sure that the urgency of climate change, the urgency of not having any gaps in in the increase of our RPS is addressed, and that we're ready with points to respond to that. In terms of the Potomac pipeline, one objection that we might anticipate is that there's no need for passing a mandatory safety review because the Potomac pipeline was stopped, wasn't it? Well, we would then need to make sure that we are able to explain that leaves us open. The denial of the easement that didn't have a lot of legal precedent, that it doesn't leave us for a reliable tool for the future, and that we know that the Eastern Shore pipeline is on its way. So we need to pass something really soon now. So at this, after you've sort of figured out what your top line messages are and you kind of communicate then you want to talk, and I just want to make sure that everybody can see. Maybe it's just that this is a little too high. I think it got shifted around a little. Okay, can folks see all of our wonderful lobbyists? And I think it was Jason. Yeah, and that's if you lean in. Okay. So here, I'll move back. There you go. All right. So what we would do now is decide who should say what in the meeting. Now we've already done this before, but you just wanna and we will have pockets like this for you on lobby night to make sure that it's distinguished who's going to say who's going to do what. So the big roles are the leader. So this person would be responsible for giving introductions, doing a meeting overview of like, hi, we're here today to talk about blank and blank, and closing, and generally keeping things on track. We want to make sure that we have somebody to tell a story about why, or give their personal reasons as to why this is important to them. We want to make sure that it's distinguished who is going to be pitching the legislation, who's actually going to be talking about the benefits, and that that we know who's going to make the ask. We want to make sure that we have somebody assigned and ready to take notes with a pen, which we've which we forgot. Oh, okay, cool. Got a pen?
We're good.
We're good. That we have a recorder who is going to take notes, and that we have someone who will keep time in the meeting. Really, that's really important then. So I'm going to be the one leading the meeting. I'm going to make sure that everybody that I'm with is introduced. We're going to have Gus here tell a personal story about why climate is important to him. I'm going to be talking about the benefits of the Clean Energy Jobs Act first, and then making the ask on that. It's actually a sort of a two-part ask because of the incineration piece. So I'll be demonstrating it. Jason is going to then, like I said, explain some of the benefits of the pipeline legislation, as well as we'll have you make the ask as well. And then Gus is going to be taking notes and also keeping time throughout the meeting. So it's good to have kind of that person who's not tied up in those other pieces. We also determined that if there are questions that come up for the legislator, that I would be the one to answer those questions because I'm a little bit more comfortable with the bills. So you would just kind of want to determine who in your group feels comfortable responding to objections. Doesn't have to be the same person who pitches the legislation. You just want to make sure that generally if there are questions that we sort of know to turn to one person, see if they know, and then other people can step in, but that we just know that we have a point person ready to answer questions. Okay, so we are actually a little early on our meeting, which is fine. So we are gonna start it weirdly at 7:23. Well, let's do 7:23. Our meeting is going to start. I'm gonna take that time to just try to get people in the shot.
I think if you push it back.
There we go. There we go. Now you can see us. Okay, great. All right. Okay, so we're walking over to Mike Bush's office. Hello, Speaker Bush.
Hi, good to meet with you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, good to meet you, sir.
We're here with Chesapeake Climate Action Network and the Maryland Climate Coalition to talk to you today about some really important pieces of legislation, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, as well as the Pipeline and Water Protection Act. I'm going to have my companions here introduce themselves. But I'll start first with myself. My name is Emily Frias, and I'm from Baltimore City.
I'm Jason Brand. I'm from Montgomery County.
I'm Gus. I'm from Southern Maryland, Leonardtown. Great, good to meet you all.
Great.
Love clean energy and water.
Great, thank you. And we just want to know how much time do you have to meet with us today?
I have 10 minutes today.
About 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll make sure to keep it in that time frame. So first, we wanted to let you know about why we've decided to come here today. And Gus would actually like to share with you a little bit about why climate is important to him.
Yeah, absolutely. So ever since I was a kid, I moved to Southern Maryland when I was about 3. As an elementary school, we had a couple big hurricanes that left us without power, without plumbing, stranded out in the woods as you get in Southern Maryland. By the time I was in high school, we were lucky if we made it a year without a similar storm or multiple. So as I'm graduating high school and embracing my future, if we're already seeing tangible effects of climate change, that's my future, that's my livelihood, that's the ground I'm literally going to be living on. So I know this is something I need to approach, or I might be underwater, quite literally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Seeing those effects across Maryland, so your story isn't the only one. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the time.
Great, thank you. So first, I would like to discuss a little bit about the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So first of all, it's called the Clean Energy Jobs Act for a reason. It's going to create 20,000 Maryland jobs due to the way that it'll increase demand. We know that the solar industry last year lost 800 jobs. And we know we need the support, and that it would be a huge benefit to our economy. So that is, I think, a big headliner about it, why it's called the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is for just the sheer number of jobs and the way that it would stimulate our economy in a reliable way. So that is a really very important piece of this legislation to us. Another aspect is, of course, the IPCC report. You probably heard that we have 12 years to solve climate change. That 12-year deadline of taking serious action on climate comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the largest convention of experts ever on a single topic in history, saying that we need to act now. We're running out of time to take serious action on climate. So in their report, they actually recommend reliance on renewables be between 48 and 60%, and the Clean Energy Jobs Act would increase our reliance on renewables to 50% by 2030, and then create a plan for 100% by 2040, which is right in line with those recommendations. So because of how urgent climate change is becoming, we're already seeing the effects of it on our planet. We know that the time to act is now. It also makes massive investments in equity, and it would create, through grant money to veterans, people of color, women entering the green energy economy. So we know that those jobs would also go to Marylanders as well, while also combating climate change. A big piece about this as well is ending incentives for trash incineration. We know that burning trash is just not clean energy. Burning trash actually emits more pollutants than the dirtiest form of fossil fuel coal. It actually emits 2.5 times as much carbon dioxide emissions than a coal, to produce the same energy than a coal power plant. So we know that it is not something that we want in our RPS. So with all of that being said, could we count on your support of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and that if you would make sure that that also includes removing trash incineration from the renewable portfolio standard?
Well, I'm still waiting to hear what delegates have to say. I see my role as leader. I usually don't take positions on bills this early on, so I'm waiting to hear back. And I also know, we have a few years to do this of a majority, and so if it doesn't happen this year, I know it'll happen in the next couple of years. Clean energy is very important to me.
Right. Well, I understand where you're coming from in your position as House Leader, but with that, actually, what we've seen. First of all, we have 73 co-sponsors in the House right now, 27 in the Senate, and we saw over during the elections that a supermajority of legislators actually supported the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So we know that it does have the support of the legislature, and as leader, we know that you have a considerable say in how things move through committee. And we would actually, if you would, ask that you emphasize this bill in committee and make sure that that you communicate with those party leaders to make sure that this comes out for a vote, because we know that the majority of the legislature does support it. To address your second concern, which is about why do we need to act on this now? As you know, the last increase in the RPS was from the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2016, and that had increases up through the year 2020. Right now, we don't have anything on the books to increase our reliance on renewables. So really, this is the year to act. So would you consider, really pushing this with the leaders in the Economic Matters Committee to make sure that it does come out for a vote, given your position as leader?
We'll definitely have conversations with the chair and the vice chair and see where they're at on the bill and talk with some of my colleagues who have already come on board to support it. And so I'll do what I can. I can't give an affirmative yes right now, but I'll check in with them.
Right. Well, we really appreciate that, and we'll follow, make sure we follow up with you. Thank you so much. So like I said, we did come here to talk about another bill, which was the Pipeline and Water Protection Act. Actually, Jason here would like to speak a little bit as to why that bill is important.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker Bush, for having us here. So and I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. So the Pipeline and Water Protection Act would require Maryland to use its authority, to assert its authority under Section 401 of the Federal Clean Water Act to require that any new pipeline, frac gas pipeline built in Maryland, be subject to an environmental study. I know that we just got through with the Potomac pipeline with having the easement denied, but that's not really, we're sort of on tenuous legal standing with that, and Maryland actually waived their right under the Clean Water Act to do a study, and what we want is to have any pipeline that comes to Maryland we just want to be able to dot our I's and cross our T's, and to be able to ensure all Marylanders that these pipelines will be safe, that any pipeline that goes through Maryland will be safe. Let's see, 474 people since 2010 have been injured by pipelines. 100 people have been killed, and there's been $3.5 billion? That is $1 billion. $1 billion have been, in damages have been done by pipeline malfunctions. And I just think it's just really important that we ensure just the safety of not just all of the people, but of our water and of our soil and our food. Because if something happens, it's going to affect all of us.
So with that being said, would you support the pipeline? And we took a really strong stance on fracking in the past. Would you please make sure that the pipeline, would you throw your weight behind the Pipeline and Water Protection Act? Yeah,
this is something that is really important to me, and I think I care a lot about. And it's just it's common sense. I have a couple questions. Just wondering, how many times in the last 10 years or so has Maryland used its 401 authority to actually review a pipeline?
So, I don't have that answer for you right now. What I do know is that right was waived in the Potomac pipeline, through the Potomac pipeline review. So we didn't see it when we know we needed it at a critical moment. I don't have a number for you exactly how many times it has been used, but I can definitely point to a strong instance where it was not used. So what we really need here is a reliable, politically independent tool that makes sure that all pipelines are subject to this review.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, like I said, it's common sense. I think it makes sense for Maryland to exercise its authority here. We want to make sure that anything that's being built in our state is up to standard, that isn't going to hurt our people. So I'm happy to support this.
Great, thank you so much for your support. And if you could take it a step further and just make sure that your colleagues in the Environment and Transportation and Economic Matters committees also see that really it's about closing the loophole.
Great, I will.
Great, thank you so much. All right, looks like our time is up, but thank you so much for meeting with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you very
I appreciate
much.
it. Thanks for coming out to
Thank you
Annapolis.
so much. Here is a packet for your review,
Thank you.
and we'll make sure that you get the information that you asked for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're done. So we're going to get into some of our discussion questions. So first of all, somebody asked how many minutes do we have typically in a meeting? It really depends on the legislator, what they're available for. They might say 10 minutes and then get pulled away. You just don't really know. So we're trying to get 15 minutes blocked out for every meeting, but you just don't always know. Okay, in terms of, let's just discuss how our role play went. So I think what worked well, for this was knowing our roles ahead of time was really important for making sense of everything. What was challenging? There's a lot of information and there's a lot to get through. And picking those facts that are really resonant and that you make sure you get those in. Even I would have liked to spend a little bit more time on incineration. I'm glad I got it in there, but I wish I would have spent maybe a little bit more time on it. It's really prioritizing that information, but I think having the assigned roles and making sure that the message is communicated effectively, I think that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
What did we learn about our targets? Well, we have some good notes. So we got some good questions from our legislator what he wanted to know how frequently this authority had been used. That was something I don't have an answer for. So that was good to know that was a question in his mind that I didn't really have an answer for. Also, as we would expect from a leader in the Speaker of the House, we know that his positions do depend a lot on what seems to be popular. So that was good. We heard that reiterated, and that we know that we need to show him that this does have larger support from the rest of the legislator, but that he does support it, and that he was concerned about what that would look like. So that was good. How are they going to vote? Well, for the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we don't really know yet. For the Clean Energy Jobs Act, some more information is needed, but we know what information is needed, which is really, really important. For the Pipeline and Water Protection Act, we saw that he thought it was a common sense piece of legislation, and that he looks like he's going to vote for it. So it's really good. Okay. So I'm gonna just take a look and see if anybody has any further questions, and then just wrap up with some information. Okay, so will we know who we are meeting with beforehand so we can look up the legislator? Yes, so you will be given, you'll be meeting with your legislators by district, so that you're actually a constituent of the person that you were, as much as possible, a constituent of the person that you're going to be meeting with. We will have that information in a packet for you, but if you wanted to look it up, it would just be your state legislators would be really who you should be focused on, whether in learning about whether or not they're in committee and kind of knowing those targets ahead of time. I would definitely recommend that. Yes, that was another thing. I think I think we did talk a lot. We had a lot of content to go through, and that's, I think, challenging about having two different pieces, or the more pieces of legislation that you need to discuss it makes it a little bit more challenging. There's a lot of information to get in, and making sure those asks are there. I think I would agree, and that would be something that while you're thinking about it, just try to get as many questions as you can from the legislator. Okay. In terms of, is it possible to drop other important bills? It really depends on how much time you get in the meeting. I would say, I mean, as much as, you know, there's just a lot of objections and questions that can come up with these two pieces of legislation. I would spend as much time, especially with the incineration piece, as you can on those. All right. And that's really what this lobby night is focusing on, is the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the campaign with the incineration and the pipeline bill. So I would spend as much time as you can on those. Okay. Well, I think that about wraps it up. If you have any other questions, you can certainly email me at emily@chesapeakeclimate.org. Just to, you know, in terms of what else you can do besides lobby, I would say call and write your legislators. Very, very important to do, especially even building up to that lobby day and the week before, and up to the hearings as they become announced. Really, really important to do that. And I will make sure that when I send out a reminder after this meeting, that you get reminded about doing that. So, all right. I think that about wraps it up. Thank you everybody so much for joining. Thank you to Avery and to Gus and Jason for joining me for this meeting, and I hope everybody got something out of it, and you can see how challenging it is, and how important having a plan is. So we hope to see you on the lobby day on Monday, and with that, I'm going to sign off. So thank you so much and have a great evening.